welcome to the Kemetic How-To Guide for Egyptian Pagan and Kemetic practitioners. I'm your host, Sharon. Happy 2023! It's a new year, time for new goals and new resolutions. Some of you might be thinking of trying your hand at writing and publishing your own book. I already know several folks who are fellow pagan authors who've gone the same route that I have. I'm here to cheer you on with some helpful tips that you can apply to any book, be it pagan or mainstream. I'm going to use examples from my own work and from a few friends who've been kind enough to give me permission to use their work as examples. So let's see how to make your project look its best. First and most important, make peace with your biggest critic, yourself. No one knows your project's life story like you do. And so no one's going to look at it quite as closely as you are. No one's going to be as harsh of a critic of it as you are. There's something that you might struggle with, but when it's finally done and someone reads it, it'll come across smoothly. On the other hand, you might get blindsided by something that you thought was great, but your reader maybe didn't think so. But don't give in to fear and self-doubt. Remember, just the fact that you're taking the time and the effort to write something already sets you apart from most of the world. And even if somebody uses an AI program to write a pagan book, can you imagine how ridiculous that's going to sound? It's still not going to measure up to your ideas, your inspiration, and your effort. So, now let's look at some ways to make sure you don't get blindsided. For one, reread and proofread your own work often, and get a beta reader if you can. Even grammar cops like myself make mistakes, and you're not going to catch them until much later when you have fresh eyes. So, keep a hard copy of your work in progress. I am the binder queen. All of my work is in binders. And keep it where you can cuddle up with it over a glass of tea or coffee and read over it, and you will find mistakes in there and just make a note of it, go back to your file and correct it. That is why it pays not to rush a book project, because you would rather catch mistakes before it goes to print. Forget NaNoWriMo. I hate National Novel Writing Month, because an entire year to write a book is a perfectly reasonable length of time, if not a minimum, to write a good book. And for my lovely and intrepid beta readers, some advice for you. In short, learn to give constructive criticism. That's something that could be its own topic, but in general, for one, it means being specific with the things you have to say. Do not read something and look up at them and smile and go, "It's good." My late best friend from high school, I let her read a script. She sat in my dorm room, read an entire script, and she looked up and smiled at me and said, "It's good." And I flipped out. I was like, "Well, what did you like about it? What did you think was good? Was there anything you thought was bad?" And that was the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Actually, it started before then, but that was one of those moments in time. So, be specific with the things that you have to say. And give good and bad criticism. Say what you liked and what you didn't like, and tell them why. And don't try to rewrite it for them. It's very easy to want to try and do that, but remember, they're the one writing this project, not you. Give suggestions if you have them, but keep in mind that your friend that you're being so kind as to read something for ultimately is going to have the final decision. Second pro tip. Don't let your software make mistakes for you. Whether you're using Microsoft Office, OpenOffice, iWork, don't let that beast get the better of you. Because software is not infallible. It will screw up some of the darndest things. If you remember, when I was reviewing Evil Speech Stand Aside by Vanessa Kindell, there was a cuneiform name of a deity that appeared twice. Well, I talked over a Discord forum with Vanessa, and she said, funny thing, that was exactly where her program hiccuped with the cut and paste. So, it was not any mistake, on her part. It was the software. Similarly, another friend of mine who's a science fiction author, Anthony Klepack, and his book here is Tales of the Destara, and I noticed that it reached a point where the page numbers went from 97, 98, 99 to 10, 11. Basically what happened was his software cut off the page numbers, and we noticed it when we were looking at the print version. Now, Anthony Klepack and Vanessa Kindell are both very capable, very talented, writers, and this is the sort of mistake that if it was left to their own brain, that wouldn't have happened. But software makes fools of us all. And when you upload your manuscript to a self-publishing site, it's going to generate a manuscript for you that's going to give you an idea of what it looks like in print before it actually sends it to print. Check that over. Make sure that there isn't something that got lost in translation between your computer and the publishing website. And watch out with autocorrect. I had to turn it off on OpenOffice when I was working on Worlds Away from Here because it kept screwing things up for me. It was changing tense and then doing other things, especially if you're writing, you have original names or obscure names like pagan deities. The software and the spell check and all that, it's going to go crazy. So you have to think for it. The computer cannot think for you on this. And another good example, this is something that comes up all the time, and I argue with autocorrect on my phone with this all the time. It's being a contraction of it is versus it's possessive. That autocorrect tends to put it's the contraction when it should be putting it's possessive. Does that all the time. I hate it. So turn off your autocorrect, or if you really need it, go back later and then, maybe get a friend who is a grammar cop, or someone to come take a look with you and just check over it and make sure that it didn't do something that it wasn't supposed to. And if you're really not sure about something, especially when it comes to a rule of grammar, Google it. You can find a lot of things, and it's a good review for me. Another interesting thing, I ended up learning the proper usage of thou dost versus he doth in archaic English, which I actually used in my novel Center of the Dark. It wasn't until after I had gone to print that I figured out I'd used it a little wrong for a particular character, but for the next book, which I'm working on getting to print now, this was a character that uses archaic English, and he will use it with correct grammar because I was able to Google the proper usage. Next tip. Use good cover photos and good pictures of yourself for your back cover. Yeah, we all say, oh, you can't judge a book by its cover, but really, we all do. So choose the best photo that you can, or the best artwork that you can for your book. One thing I can say about celebrating the Egyptian gods, I'm really proud of the content that's inside, but I needed a better cover photo than what's actually here, because this one is too dark. It was the best I had at the time, but whenever I do a revised edition sometime in the future, I will use a different cover, different photo for the cover. And another example, fellow pagan author Ed Vanderjagt wrote, his first book was Descent of Inanna, an annotated and illustrated, and he said himself that's his least favorite cover. And we'll get back to this in a minute because it's actually a very good example of some things, some pitfalls that as a beginner you might run into. And try to make sure that you've got some good contrast. Again, picking on my pal Anthony Klepack, this probably looked really good on the screen, but in print, you can barely see the title text over the black background. And that's a problem with computers. I can see a lot of things that were obviously designed on a computer, and the person designing it didn't step back from their computer. They thought, oh well, it's 6 inches in front of my face and it looks great. No, you've got to get some distance in order to look and see, does it stand out, does it pop? That's something that I was taught years ago in college back in the 90s. Building on those recommendations, always remember the colors that you see on screen when you're designing your cover in whatever art program you use, and there are several I'll talk about in a minute. It's always going to look different when you get the final print version. Typically the colors come out darker. Again, talking about my novel, Center of the Dark, I spent a lot of time doing some nice shading on Volcanus and Teratron here, and in the file you can see all of that. It came out a little darker than I would have preferred on the cover. Also, be careful when you're picking out tans too, because they can end up going green or brown or orange when you print it. So it helps to print that proof, wait, get it in the mail, and then see if you need to tweak something. Also, make sure that you set your image file to CMYK, not RGB. CMYK, which stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, black, or Darren just calls it sea monkey, that is specifically set for print because that has information for your colors that are going to be printed out, versus RGB, red, green, blue, which is for video. You're looking at me right now in RGB, but if you wanted to print out something of me, you would want to switch it to CMYK. Also, make sure that your minimum DPI is 300, because that's going to give you the best print quality. I'm going to pick on Eternal Egypt for a second, because they included images like for the Litany of Ra, and when I saw this I could tell that they were starting with a very low DPI, dots per inch, their resolution, when they put this image in the book. You want to have 300 DPI for all of your images, including your black and white stuff, because otherwise it's not going to come out as crisp when it goes to print. If you choose to put a photo of yourself on your back cover, then use the best picture you can, and consider this. If you wouldn't put it on Tinder, don't put it on the back cover of your book. Get a friend to help you take some good pictures using natural light, and try not to wear something with a loud print or a design that's going to distract away from your face. And try not to wear orange. We took some pictures for Morgan, and love you, Morgan, but I'm not sure if orange is really your color. Maybe it is. I don't know, but I would recommend using something plain, a dark colored t-shirt or something like that. Another tip, don't use the fonts and the cover builders that they have on Lulu or CreateSpace. Especially if you're not a trained artist, it may be tempting to just use the cover builders that they have there and the fonts that they provide. Don't sell yourself short like that, because their choices are terrible. And it'll make your work look like everything else out there that's self-published. If you go on Lulu, it will generate a template based on the length and thus the thickness of the printed form of your manuscript, and you can download that. And you can use that to give you the exact size for your front cover, your back cover, and your spine in the middle. Do that and use your software to build your cover over it. And of course, Adobe Photoshop is everywhere. There's Photoshop Elements that comes free with a lot of things. Also, there's GIMP Art, which is a very good program. It's open source. You can download it for free. And there are some photographers and graphic designers that like certain things about GIMP Art better than Photoshop. So those are some options you have in order to design a cover. And I recommend the whole cover template because my first edition of Following the Sun, I designed the front cover, I designed the back cover, but I let Lulu design the spine. And I saw it and I hated it. So you can bet I changed that for the revised edition. Because the fonts that Lulu and CreateSpace offer are just crazy. You do not need, Lucida handwriting or something like that for your book. Stick with your basic Arial or Times New Roman. And actually, that's one of the things that really, like Descent of Inanna, this is one of those handwriting fonts, and, of course, I'm not saying anything that the author doesn't already know about. He said, oh, I hate that cover, and, he might end up doing a revised edition of that, too. But the content itself, I have to say, if you're interested in learning about, Sumerian mythology, I would recommend picking this up. But don't use their generators. They're terrible. And yes, a lot of font geeks would probably complain about the fact that, oh my god, you're using papyrus. But I write books about ancient Egyptian religion. Where else are you going to use papyrus font? P.S. Don't use CreateSpace. I used Amazon's self-publishing arm, CreateSpace, for my first science fiction novel, Worlds Away from Here. And I was doing that to try to keep it separate from my Pagan books, which are all on Lulu. Well, then I figured out that you could read all but the last 2 or 3 pages on Amazon's preview. And I'm not the only one that they did that to. Naos Alexandria put together a Egyptian prayer book that also you can read 75% of that thing through Amazon Preview. It's funny. They won't let you do that to the big guys, but us? So I yanked that thing off of CreateSpace, and now all of my books, all 3, soon to be 4, of my science fiction novels, and of course all of my Pagan books, are on Lulu, where I have greater control over how much can be seen in the preview, and something else you have to watch out for. I can also make sure that there aren't third-party sellers trying to undercut me by selling my own books used for a lower price. The devil is in the details, so pay attention when you're setting up your distribution for your book. And that is why I am sharing with you this information about self-publishing. Because the big guys don't care about letting us get heard. The big publishers are only concerned about the broadest common denominator, and that is why all of the Pagan books that they put out are pablum at best. Big publishers consider a book to have a shelf life of 7 months at best. Guess what? Following the Sun is still selling copies 13 years after I first put it out. And see, the ironic thing is, we Pagan authors have it fairly good because Pagans are one of the few demographics of adult readers that still actively read books. Sci-fi? Everybody just wants to wait for the movie to come out. Well, guess what? If nobody reads the book, there will be no movie. So, if I can give my fellow authors of whatever niche variety they are a little bit of that fire from Olympus, if you will, then let's all have a cookout, shall we? Now, if you're not an aspiring author, that's okay too. You have an even greater role in supporting your friends and those that you know that are writers like myself, Vanessa Kindell at Vanderjagt, Anthony Klepack, another dear friend of mine, Matt Kirkby. This is another example of, this is actually my artwork, but this is, this was another early cover that was done using one of Lulu's templates. But Matt Kirkby does a lot of work in fantasy and science fiction and stuff like that. So, and there's probably other folks out there too. And you know what? Everybody complains about, Hollywood's out of ideas. Yeah, they are. Because they're just recycling what they know makes money. Nobody wants to take a risk anymore. The risk comes from the original work that's next door to you. So support your fellow authors. Support your friends who are authors if you're not one. And you can continue to support this channel, of course, by making sure you like this video, hit subscribe, give us a super thanks, and we'll give you a shout out. I have to say thank you to all of my lovely peeps that tune in on Fridays, and have been giving us some super stickers. Of course, you can also join us on Patreon. The links for that are in the description, and I'm going to include links for some of the works that I talked about, some of the authors and their pages, and things like that, so that we can kind of network. And, you know, if you are someone that has a book that you're working on, you know, or you know a niche that, you know, we haven't heard about, tell us, you know, and by networking we can make sure that good ideas get heard. So for the Kemetic How-To Guide, this is Sharon, wishing you Senemti.
Enjoyed this video? Then be sure to hit like and subscribe to the Kemetic Independent channel. You can also buy my books on Lulu.com, and special thanks to all my Patreon supporters. Join us for updates, outtakes, and exclusive videos only on Patreon. Check the description for links.